Good morning. My name is Victor M. Manjarres Jr. I am the project director for the Center for Law and Human Behavior. On behalf of the center, and behalf of the University of Texas El Paso, thank you for attending today. As you know, as you RSVP'd, this symposium started to fill pretty quickly. We actually had a smaller venue and went to a slightly larger venue. So thank you very much for your interest, not only in this symposium, the previous 6 that we've had, and the next several that we'll have to conclude our series for this year. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the symposium series before I actually get into some of the logistical things that we need and introduce our first speakers. This symposium series is actually brought to you by the Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology, Office of University Programs grant. We're actually a subcontractor for the University of Houston, the Borders, Trade, and Immigration Institute. And so part of this grant is to bring a symposium series out where we can have, hopefully, bridge that gap between practitioners and academia, and be able to not only help the practitioners, but also to some degree provide some additional insight to our researchers that come to the universities. With that, I'd like to do a brief introduction of our speakers. I am not going to go through the list that you have of the Meet the Researchers, but I would like to introduce you a little bit. Our first speaker, or the first person I'll introduce, is Dr. Christian Meisner from Iowa State University. He's the professor of psychology. Dr. Meisner's research is actually pretty well supported by the National Science Foundation, Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Defense, as well as the U.S. intelligence community. And his work is on psychological processes underlying investigative interviews is the main thing. It's one of the things why we asked Dr. Meisner to come down. And then I was almost going to introduce his doctor, but it's Professor Coral Dando from the University of Westminster. Very fortunate to have her here yesterday. She actually came in from England yesterday. She's also a leading researcher in this field. What's interesting with Professor Dando, which I thought was very unique in that profession, is that her academic experience follows 12 years as a London police officer. So you have a very nice blend of an insight in terms of practitioners as to the research. So thank you both. We also have retired Colonel Stephen Kleiman, retired from the United States Air Force. Colonel Kleiman actually was an intelligence officer with 30 years of operational leadership experience with assignments worldwide, as you can imagine. He is recognized as a subject matter expert in human intelligence, strategic integration, intelligence support, and special operations. Thank you as well, sir. And our last participant, but not the least, is Mr. Eric Phillips. He's a former Army Special Operations and Contract Interrogator. He also holds a BA and a Master's in Psychological Sciences from the University of Colorado, and has been well versed in terms of interrogation intelligence with his experience in over 3 operational combat theaters. So, for you, thank you very much today. Thank you. So with that, I will turn that over to Zip. This part? Mm-hmm. I don't want to give them a second, just read on mic sheet. Terrific. Thank you. Thank you.
Do a quick sound check. Do we have any folks here from ICE? Good, so let's do a quick sound check. Remember that one? No, anyway. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's actually an honor. I first met Dr. Meister when he was on the faculty here, and the support for the Institute is fantastic. The support we've received. A couple quick thanks. Leonora Ortega, where are you? Thank you, girlfriend, she always makes things happen. In fact, her job is the most difficult in the world because the better she does her job, the easier it looks for all the rest of us. We just show up and everything somehow works, so thank you. Where'd it go? Did Mr. Monjes, did you leave already? He's here? Oh, he's in the back, okay. First of all, I have a thanks for the invitation, but also we were told that this seminar was going to fill Sun Stadium. Is that right, the Sun Bowl? But something more important came up apparently, the monster truck or something ridiculous like that. I mean, when they could listen to us versus watching monster truck. Anyway, so my goal here is to be an ambassador of science from a practitioner's perspective. My goal is by the end of our time this morning that I'm going to hear at least one amen. Because you have very, very challenging work. You've chosen a line of profession that involves keeping people safe by doing some very, very difficult tasks. And part of it is making sense of the world through the information that you obtain through interviews, through interrogations, through elicitations, recruitments, that sort of operations. And so hopefully you will, well, I know you'll be exposed to some ideas today that may rock your world a bit. So if you could just maintain an open mind and an open heart, I think you will end the day quite thrilled. I know I have been. My only concern, my only regret, I guess, is that 30 years ago I wasn't aware. In fact, a lot of this research didn't even exist to understand how we can most effectively elicit information. So, I'll begin with a quick war story. Operation Desert Storm. A lot of people in this room, looking, not a lot, but a few probably weren't even born yet. But that was my second military deployment. So I was in Panama. So I'm the experienced interrogator by the time we get to this war. Here's General Schwarzkopf. He's briefing the famous left hook, where 2 tank battalions came out of Saudi Arabia unexpectedly to Iraqi intelligence and pretty much won the war within 100 hours. But there was a challenge in doing this, and it doesn't show here, but there was a minefield, quite a large minefield standing between those tank battalions and their objective. So the information had to be obtained. We had a combat engineer. It came down to our interrogation facility, and I'm the experienced guy. I'm a captain. Here's part of my team of 25 interrogators. So let's have Captain Kleiman talk to him. He knows what he's doing. So I used a couple of my interpreters from Kuwait and sat down and chatted with this individual and produced a number of reports, including these memory sketches of how minefields are laid out. And as an Air Force officer, it was kind of unusual. I didn't have the Army background, but I became an expert. And I was told we saved lives. They expected to lose lives when they breached those minefields. Not a single one, right? So I tell you this story to point out the fact that I'm a hero. Wrong. Very, very wrong. Because can anybody tell me how I got that information? Good, because I don't know either. And I didn't then, and I don't know now. And I realized when lives are on the line that you cannot just sit around and try to be cool. You have to actually be able to produce. And science can help us understand that much better. So this is really intelligence. For those of you who know, it's not out there recruiting sources or doing the interrogations, but it's the reports. And so we got to stay inside a nice little trailer for a little while because that kept the laptops. You can see this. I have a laptop here that weighs less than a pound. We have a 10-pounder there. Things have changed, just like science. So here's, whether it was Desert Storm or my entire operational career, and certainly your professional challenge on a day-to-day basis, this describes the landscape that you encounter. It's shaped by VUCA. VUCA is volatility, means things happen very quickly. Uncertainty, it's hard to ever predict what the next step. Complexity, it's more than complicated. These interactions between people, between events, again, very difficult to predict. And finally, ambiguity. There's no simple rules sometimes. We're trained with rules, we're trained with checklists, we're trained with a very, very linear model that doesn't apply to a world shaped by VUCA. Here's the problem. At one time, science accepted science around the world was flat. So I guess with a flat world, can you say around the world? It doesn't work. But the same sort of science, the same sort of mythology, if you will, drives a lot of what we know about interrogation. And that's where the rocking of your world will come. We'll start with a flat world and we'll end with something that looks very, very different. It's the same science that drives them both. What we don't want to have is mental isolation. And we do this. We cut off sources of information, especially those that shake our sense of what's true. And what's true is simply often what we've either tried to derive from our own experience or the truth, the so-called truth that's been shared by people with more experience than ourselves. The problem is we don't ask that very, very demanding question that we should all ask, is how do you know that? If somebody says a certain approach strategy, a certain strategy for eliciting rapport, for asking a question in a precise way, how do they know that it works? Without science, they simply don't. It's a guess. So what we want is mental integration, where we have these images, these impressions that really reflect the real world. Not what we want it to be, not what we hope it to be, not what would be easy to deal with, but the real world, which is often difficult and messy and wicked. What we deal with, and this is something that you have to be very, very careful of, it's an insidious disease that can affect all of us if we don't watch out. First of all, selective exposure. We're very selective of what we turn to as sources of information. And if it's not consistent with what we believe, we reject it outright and we dismiss it. Which means also what we see in the world and our own experience, trying to draw meaning from our experience, we selectively perceive what has happened, only to support what we previously believed to be true. It's a mental model. A mental model is simply how we see the world based on our experience, based on our training, based on our culture, based on our language, based on the totality of the experiences that make us unique. As we see, out there. It's these general ideas that shape how we see things. I hope this right now is already beginning to make sense to you, that if your mental model of the world does not reflect the real world in front of you, how can you possibly deal with it in the most effective fashion? We expect then that certain events happen and it leads to certain results. Our mental models, if they're not reflective and they're not constantly being refined to reflect a changing reality, then the problems will only multiply. So mental models essentially, it says, they form belief systems, it gives meaning to events, and we interpret our experiences in light of them. Mental models help us, but they can also hold us back. What we need to do is be able to evolve. And this is the way science projects going forward, how we will evolve. See that? Does that resonate with your experience out there? Science helps us refine our judgment, how we make sense of our experiences, how we draw meaning from the events, from people, from interactions. So from all this experience that I've had, going back to Desert Storm, and I had that epiphany that I told myself, I will not operate like this again. I started looking for any source of science to explain the experiences that not only that I had directly, but also that I observed as I moved up through the ranks and was supervising others. So I made some predictions. And that prediction was, if I'm going to live in this world, I need to learn how to manage risk. And managing risk is not a guessing game. It's a very precise, very thoughtful, very objective-based process. So what we needed was research. And thankfully, about 10 years ago, a little over now, the US government started to take another look about what do we know about interrogation? And equally important, what do we not know? Or even the third, and perhaps even more important, it's that famous saying, it's not what we know that hurts us, it's what we know that simply ain't so. I think that really plagues the profession, the practice, if you will, of interrogation. Because without research, we don't have knowledge. I mean, knowledge, facts, that build upon other facts, that build models. So let me take a quick segue here, especially before Dr. Meisner speaks directly to the science. And that is, what is science? Let's start with what it is not. First of all, it is not just labeling. I just finished, this is my 6th straight week of various training endeavors, and it always comes up, psychologists just label what we already do. Well, yes and no. Yes, they do put labels on them, but it's far more than that. First of all, it starts building it describes what you're already doing, but it builds a precise lexicon. It does describe what you're doing, but yet it describes, more importantly, the underlying processes that explain why A causes B on a consistent basis. And with that in hand, rather than just having a label, you're able to adapt your process, adapt your experience even, to new and a broader array of challenges. Science does objectively identify cause and effect. We walk into an interrogation and we walk out, let's say, with some information, we deem that successful. And if we're asked how we were able to elicit that information, we'll describe not what we did, but what we thought we did, what we intended. I asked nothing but open-ended questions, when videos often show that we ask closed-ended questions. Without scientists to look at that objectively, and without judgment, to make sense of our experience, we're really lost. And science does encourage real precision in thinking, and I'm a big advocate. Precision in words will lead to precision in thinking, and the outcome then is inevitable. And that's where it builds its lexicon. At some point, in my vision of this practice, of this profession, that you could be working here in El Paso, and you could go to anywhere else in this country, perhaps anywhere else in the world, and talk to your colleagues, and use some terms that they will immediately recognize. You don't have to tell them the whole, quote, war story. They know exactly what the challenge and how you overcame it. Dr. Meisner taught me this about science. It's so easy, especially when you're new to it. It's like being a former smoker. You're just so emphatic about it. But science is not certainty. It never will be. It's an evolution. It's a very thoughtful, objective process, but it's probabilistic. With science at our back, we have a higher probability of accurately understanding the challenge before us and therefore accurately identifying the strategies that can help overcome the challenge and achieve our outcomes. And it creates these models. And models, think about theory of gravity, theory of evolution. There's perhaps some people in this room who think theory is dismissive, but let's think about theory of gravity. If you think it's just a theory, let's go test it, shall we? How many floors in this building? Who wants to take the first step? But what a theory is really, it's a model that's facts built upon other facts that do two things. It both describes accurately the phenomenon, the event, the interaction that you're trying to understand, but it also puts you in a position to more accurately predict next steps. What are the outcomes? What are the possible outcomes? So anyway, return to our story. So with research, leads to knowledge, really strong knowledge. We know, we have facts to support our contentions about a certain approach strategy, about understanding, about building rapport or trust, about credibility assessment. That leads to a skill that is unique and specific to your practice that people walking down the street who are informed only by television will not have nor understand. And then we're able to create strategies for the specific task at hand that are objective, that are measurable, and that are reliably effective. So when we go back, instead of seeing a world like this, that we love so well because it helps us, it fits our mental model, we begin to see a world more like this. Even though, in your practice, sometimes the world looks an awful lot like this. So you have to ask yourselves, what is it that you see? What is in your eye that keeping you from seeing reality? I mean, we can suffer like this. This guy's probably happy for a while. But when he tries on his pants, it still don't fit. What we need to do is deal with what is true. Not truth. Truth is something that we want to be true, whether the facts support it or not. True means we have objective understanding. We have objective evidence that something that, for example, that a rapport building approach, information gathering approach, is more useful than an accusatorial approach. That's what's true. So I welcome you to the evolution. One day we'll get a revolution, but we are evolving this practice, and you, by being here today, are part of it, whether you knew it or not. This is, by the way, this is an important point where you can say amen or something like that. Yeah. That was subliminal. It didn't work very well, did it? Go buy popcorn? No, it didn't work good. Okay. So we have a choice, really. You have a choice. You see, I color match my suit and my tie and my hair. I have enough gray to look like I have some wisdom, which I lack, but certainly a lot of reflections and some regrets, but also a hope for the next generation, that they can be far better than I ever was. And science will help you there. So you have a choice when you approach your task. You can have an integrated system built on evidence-based. When we say evidence, it means science, objective science-based, tested, human rights compliant, because that's key to our strategic interests and the model of ourselves that we hold true. Or you can have what I described here, a toolbox. We often use that, or we hear that from people. We present a very integrated suite of strategies, and they say, all put in the toolbox along with other ideas. Well, it's really not, because the toolbox is really this. It's a collection of disparate, myth-based, intuitively contrived and unreliable methods are likely to be both confusing and, more dangerously, counterproductive, no matter how much you want them to be true. This is a toolbox, but so is this. The Army Field Manual is now the law of the land for even much of law enforcement. And there's never been a scientific or an attempt to objectively understand from a science perspective whether those strategies even work. So we can't use toolbox. What we need is a model like this. And we're going to talk about that for the remainder of this morning. A quick history segue. This gentleman was a physician who had the audacity to question other gentlemen physicians and their cleanliness. For example, what if we washed our hands? Would fewer women die in childbirth? And in fact, that's exactly what happened. Fewer deaths of what they called then childbed fever, which was just literally people would go from autopsies to delivering children. But was it accepted? I mean, clearly it makes sense to you right away, understanding germ theory. But at the time, they said, physicians are gentlemen. We're inherently clean. It's a divine right. Well, those who used his methods saved lives, and ultimately it became the standard. But there are a lot of people, a lot of very bright people, who pushed back. It became such a memorable moment in history, especially the history of knowledge, that we have the Semmelweis reflex. It says here, as you can read this, it's when we encounter something new and different from what we believe, we just reject it, we push back, because it's just so much easier, so much more comfortable to keep with our known mental models rather than adapting to the future. So Max Planck, Nobel Prize winner, he said this: a new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because those opponents eventually die. And a new generation grows up that is familiar with it. Now, I'm a strategist at heart. I'm not sure that's the best way to go, but I also come from special operations, so if a few people have to die, we can also arrange that, but that's all right. That was a joke. We can edit that out of the film right back there. But really, must we advance science one funeral at a time? I think not. I think we can do far better than that. I think instead, what we can realize, and this is what I want you to walk away with, practice plus research equals these models that present infinite possibilities. So replace these direct questions that we're so comfortable with a whole new model of open-ended questions and affirmations and reflective listenings and summaries that we can demonstrate, not just through laboratory experiments, but through field testing, are far more effective in eliciting information, richer, detailed, more. So when you encounter a person like this, with science, you could either be angry and refer to them as those people, or you can think about things like, and here's your option that you want to deal with them, or you can think about things like, well, autonomy. We're going to talk about that a little bit. Or even empathy. Because unlike the people walking the street, you're not paid to have an ego or an emotion. What you're paid to do is elicit information as effectively as possible, the richest possible telling of a story that may save lives and certainly will support the national security interests of this nation. And we find autonomy and empathy there, because through those, you're able to make sense in a world that sometimes you can't tell what is up and what is down. So I used to be a case officer, meaning I used to recruit agents. Does spy mean anything to you? So of course, we all thought of ourselves as James Bond, right? But there's an interesting thing, how the James Bond character often changes, right? He evolves. But always at his side is somebody who knows better. And by the way, I'm rarely mistaken for Daniel Craig. I get that. But my sources say that Daniel Craig, much to his chagrin, sometimes they think, Steve? No, I'm Daniel. But really, every James Bond out there, and I'm looking at you, can't just operate on their own. You need your own cue. So I'm going to end my remarks there and turn it over to my very own cue, Dr. Chris Meisner.
know how I can follow that.
British accent.
Well, we brought that in,
Oh, I brought that.
but I don't have that. Good morning. It's really great to have you here, and frankly to be with you. As Steve mentioned, we're at a really critical point where an evolution is happening in this field, in this area. We've had an incredible opportunity to, over the past decade or so, really develop a scientific understanding of elicitation, of rapport development, of securing cooperation and ultimately disclosure, and really applying that to a variety of contexts. Steve mentioned mental models, and I'd like to start there. And I kind of want to set the tone here, by the way. Neither Steve nor Eric nor Coral nor myself like to sit up here and just talk at you. We like to be interactive. We want you to question what we're presenting to you. We want you to understand and engage with what we're presenting to you. So I want to start with that. How many of you have, in terms of mental model, have received training on interview or interrogation in the past? Just raise your hand. Okay. All right. So give me, if you will, can I have a couple of volunteers to tell me what type of training you've had? Maybe it's just within a police academy, or you went to FLETC, or you took a READ course. Can I have a couple of volunteers just tell me the kind of training that you've gone through? Don't be shy. We're going to do this all day. A couple of examples. I saw lots of hands. Right here.
Army interrogator.
Army interrogator. So Fort Huachuca?
Fort Huachuca.
Yep. Been there, done that.
Yeah.
Exciting? Interesting?
Yeah.
Okay. Valuable? What'd you learn?
Just the different, what the Army, or what's currently certified as being able to conduct interrogations pretty much worldwide right now.
Right.
As far as U.S. Army forces being able to conduct interrogations.
So you know the FM pretty well? Know the approaches pretty well?
Yeah.
Okay. How long ago did you have training?
The last training I got was about 2 months ago.
2 months ago. Okay. Great. Thank you very much. Somebody else. Type of training that you've had. You have to speak really loud. Great. So can you tell us, just give us a couple of things that you learned from that course?
Body language, trying to identify the body language for positive, fidgeting of the knees, the separating themselves, the interviewing themselves, when they put once distance between the conversation.
Terrific. Okay, so just so everybody could hear here, we're talking about body language, fidgeting, distance between the interview and the interviewer and the subject. I assume there's a credibility assessment component to that. Okay, terrific. Thank you very much. Maybe one more.
Crisis negotiation.
Crisis negotiation. Okay, tell us a little bit about what did you learn in crisis negotiation?
The main things are be calm, active listening skills.
Good. What do you mean by can you just active listening skills? What does that mean?
Just letting them, most crises is letting them vent, letting them get whatever it is that they want to be heard out there, and then validate those that concern or whatever it is that's causing the thing between to that break, whether it's suicide, terrorism, any kind of case that would involve a crisis.
Terrific.
So recognizing that and then building that relationship of trust, going forth from there.
Trust. What is trust in that context?
Making a friend, basically, at that moment, and trying to put yourself, doesn't mean you're condoning the situation or their actions, but putting yourself, empathy, going back to empathy, putting yourself in that shoes to see where it is that they're coming from, and relating to them so that they will open up to you.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Do you think that the skills in the negotiation context might translate to other elicitation contexts? Okay. Eric?
Could you repeat what he said, so everyone can?
Oh, yeah. So he said a lot, and I active listened, so I should be able to repeat this. It was focused on active listening, engagement, right? Understanding, perspective taking, I might say, empathy, right? Putting yourself in their shoes, and building or developing trust. Did I capture that?
Right, the only last thing I would add is just the point is to get that behavioral change with the stairway, to get that, you can elicit a change in their behavior, get them to do something that it is that you want to do, eventually we have to set up that relationship of trust.
Good, good. So behavioral change that leads to, I might use the term a cooperative state of engagement, right? Terrific. Thank you very much for sharing. We really want this to be an interactive session, day with you. We're going to do some demos. We're going to tell you about the science. We're going to show you the science. We're going to maybe have you do a little bit of the science in the interviewing. Have you practice a little bit. But I want to just open up for the next few minutes and talk about where the science came from. So Steve mentioned about 10 years ago, things started to change. And something actually really important happened about 10 years ago. How many of you are familiar with the Educing Information Report? Nobody in the room except Coral, who's from the UK, I might add. This is a US government document.
Slowly start presenting your evidence to
No, I'll tell you what this is. So in 2000, when did it start, Steve? 2004, 2005? 2005. The US government, the intelligence community decided that we needed to really understand what we knew about interrogation and what the science of interrogation really was. So the US Intelligence Science Board, led by Dr. Robert Fine, and with many important contributions, I might add, from Colonel Steve Kleinman, who you just heard from, led an effort to conduct a systematic review of the US government's capability and the scientific knowledge that went into how we train Army interrogators, federal law enforcement investigators and interrogators, elicitors in general. There's a couple quotes I want to offer you because I think the findings of this report, which by the way you can get on the web, you can download the PDF. I'd encourage you to pull it down and read it. It was actually published in 2006. A couple of quotes. Training manuals, materials, anecdotes contain information about common and recommended interrogation practices, but virtually none of them documents or cites any original research. And no scientific research substantiates the effectiveness of these approaches. It also even appears that some of the conventional wisdom that's guided training and policy for half a century, 50 years, is at odds with existing scientific knowledge. And one more. And this really hits on Steve's comments. Experience and lessons learned offer a necessary but insufficient basis for determining the effectiveness of interrogation practices. And in fact, the report recommended that a program of scientific research on interrogation practices is both necessary and highly feasible. Researchers have diverse venues available to investigate practices. Such a program should combine experimental research with a substantial effort to perform independent and objective analyses of specific interrogation results. 2006 were those recommendations. 2008, we had an election. January 2009, on the first day of his presidency, President Obama signed Executive Order 13491, which created a task force to investigate detention policy and to investigate interrogation practices. That task force came back with a recommendation that ultimately created what's known as the HIG, the High Value Detainee Interrogation Group. The HIG was officially stood up the next year, 2010. And its mission is to deploy the best interrogation resources against terrorism suspects, identified as having information with the greatest potential to prevent terrorist attacks against the US and its allies. It's actually an interagency group. It's kind of led by a director from the FBI, but includes the Central Intelligence Agency as well as the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, CIA, FBI, as well as other resources it coordinates with many other entities. What's interesting and unique about the Hague, and unique to its charter, is that not only does it have an operational mission, but it also has a research mission in-house. It was charged with standing up the first federally funded research program on interview and interrogation in 5 decades. And not only that, but it also has a third leg to the stool, which is training and dissemination. It's charged with translating that science to best practice and working with the schoolhouses to disseminate that knowledge. I want to tell you just a little bit about the Hague Research Program. The goal of the research program is not only to evaluate the effectiveness of existing programs like the FM and the approaches in the FM, like the use of nonverbals and body language, like the use of accusatorial tactics, theming, for example, like the use of elicitation methods, active listening, empathy, development of trust. But it's also charged with going back to the science, reaching into theory and developing new methods that are evidence-based so that we evolve as a practice. All of the work that the Hague does is unclassified, and it's subjected to review by human subjects committees. So we meet that really important ethical and legal standard in the practices that are developed and the research that's conducted. Now, I'm really happy to be back at UTEP and to be able to kind of share this. I spent 8 years here at UTEP as a faculty member, and when the Higgs stood up this program, I was part of a team whose members are here today, by the way, Dr. Harmon Hosh up here in the front, and Miss Leonora Ortega Martinez up here in the front as well. The three of us ran a $12 million 5-year research program for the Hague that coordinated researchers all over the world to conduct studies on interrogation and interviewing. Every year we would share our findings at a symposium in the DC area. That first symposium, we had about, how many, Leonora? 25, 30 people in a hotel room, mostly researchers and people from the Hague. The fifth year, our keynote was the FBI director, Mueller, and we had about 350 attendees at the National Academy of Sciences, coordinating with all of the major federal training agencies, operational entities, practitioners, administrators, policymakers, people from the Hill were there as well. The program has taken off. It's now in its 7th year and still going strong. So since 2010, it's awarded more than 120 contracts and involved more than 35 research teams all around the world. Professor Coral Dando is here with us today. By the way, in the UK, they like you to call professor. Professor in the UK actually comes with status. I might move there someday. We work with folks not only in the US, but also Western Europe, Southeast Asia, Middle East, and Africa. This research is done not only in US context, but international context. It's done in different languages. It also isn't solely focused on the practice of interrogation. And one of the things I wanted to draw out is that, in fact, the skills that are developed and have been developed from this research program transcend some of those elicitation contexts. So whether it's strategic debriefing, whether it's source elicitation or recruitment, whether it's hostage negotiation, whether it's interviewing a witness or a victim, or it's interrogating a subject. The fundamental processes and practices that we'll talk about today actually operate in each of those contexts. And as Steve was mentioning to you, it involves, and what we're going to try to preach to you here is the strategic use of these skill sets, understanding the context and adapting to the context. Projects has also resulted in about 125 publications, peer-reviewed publications in the literature in that time, and we have partnerships with federal training facilities, as well as federal and state local law enforcement. Steve was just they've now trained, in its 7th year, they've now trained more than 35 or 40 agencies, both at the federal, state, and local levels, and also transcending military intelligence and law enforcement domains. The goal here is to disseminate this research. Just very quickly, I want to give you a sense that the research is not done in a laboratory solely, right? Laboratory studies, experimental studies are actually quite important for the reasons that Steve brought up. They help us to determine cause and effect. But any laboratory experimental method is limited in some ecological validity, and so we can't rely solely on that methodology. In fact, a lot of the research that we'll talk about today is based on field observation, actually going out into the field, systematically coding counterterrorism, major law enforcement investigations, undercover collection opportunities, systematically coding those for what works and how people do their jobs, taking that into the laboratory and experimentally manipulating that, understanding it, applying theory, then moving to the training academy. We've had a wonderful opportunity to collaborate with a number of training academies, including conducting studies, research studies out at FLETC, out at Fort Huachuca, and other venues. And then working with those same training academies to work on validating the training. So once we have an understanding of what works, can we, as a team of researchers and practitioners, effectively translate that material in a way that practitioners can pick it up and not only understand it, but use it, deploy it, and can we show that it's effective? And that's how we close the loop. We call this translational research. We close the loop. And so we've now conducted a number of field studies in which we've trained operators such as yourself on these new methods. And we've followed you out into the field and watched you use or deploy those tactics. And we've assessed statistically whether it gave you an advantage, as Steve said, a probabilistic advantage in collecting more information. The take home is that it does. And we'll talk about some of that data throughout the day. So let me just run through the model that Steve alluded to, and then we'll transition, take a quick break. At the center of this model are two goals, two states that are objectives for any elicitation context. The first is, how do you achieve a state of cooperation? Engagement and cooperation, right? You need an individual who's willing to talk to you, who's willing to engage with you, who's willing to tell you a little bit about themselves, even if they might withhold some information. So how do you achieve that cooperative state? And then secondly, once you've achieved that cooperative state, because the research says you have to have cooperation before you can facilitate disclosure, how do you achieve complete and accurate disclosure of information? How do you elicit the critical information that you need? That's the second goal. We're going to talk this morning about two cycles that are important to engaging those two goals. The first is the relationship cycle. We're going to talk about what it means to develop a relationship in that context. We're going to talk about the nature of rapport. How do you define it, this often used term of rapport? What does it mean? What is trust? How does that fit into this context? And what are the tactics that you can leverage to facilitate the development of trust or rapport to achieve cooperation? The second cycle is, once you've obtained cooperation, how do you achieve disclosure? And we call that the information cycle. What are the elicitation skills that you need in order to achieve complete and accurate information from the subject? Those can be as simple as good questioning skills, which we'll talk with you about today, active listening, empathy and engagement, offering affirmations, reflecting back, or they could involve strategically collecting information from the memory of the subject. We'll talk about the cognitive interview and how that'll allow you to enhance the recall of the subject that you're dealing with. And all of this, by the way, is wrapped up in what science has to say about the very best ways to assess credibility. And we're going to challenge your mental models, as Steve said. We're going to challenge even some of the training that you've had recently that tell you that certain cues to deception are valid and reliable indicators. And ultimately, let me give you the take-home. We're going to focus you on elicitation and strategic elicitation in ways that you can assess credibility based on known or to-be-collected information, objectively. We're going to spend the afternoon on credibility assessment. We're going to talk about kind of two different contexts today, just to lay the groundwork. The first context is that more typical custodial environment in which you have an individual that you're interviewing, and you're in a space together, and time isn't as much of an essence, right? So you maybe have an hour, or 2 hours, 3 hours, days, weeks, months. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the challenge of brief interviews at what I call portals. These are entry points in which people are achieving or seeking access, but for which they're subject to screening, right? So TSA, the border, events, Secret Service events. Anytime where you have a screening process that allows you to assess who's coming through that portal. Those are what we call brief interview opportunities. Maybe you have a couple of minutes to screen and assess whether there's a threat or not a threat. We're going to talk about how these skills and questioning strategies apply to that context as well. So that's what we have in store for you today. We're going to try to break down the model, break down the science, offer you the principles and the tactics that go along with that, and also show you how it works operationally. Some of this, I think you're going to say, this meets with my experience. Some of it is going to directly challenge your training and experience. But I will tell you that everything we talk about today is grounded on evidence and science. We know it works under a variety of contexts, and we've worked it through that translational model.